Okay, now, one test real quick just to see if this actually does make sense. If it is integrated, then you should be able to see a relationship between Christ and God. And I'm not going to tell you what that relation is yet. I want you to guess. If my theory is correct and you can follow my evolutionary path to the same destination that I reached, then you should have the right answer, which is it's an inversion. So you've got God who starts off with perfection, and then he folds in, right, to God's self, and his suffering begins, and then it gets compounded because of all these universes that don't get it, that all these people that don't get it, all this darkness that doesn't understand the light. All of that compounds and compounds and compounds because of the process of creation being fractal. So as soon as something gets done, then the immediate result is there must be nothing beyond that totality because it's reached a totality. So this is the crystallization point. It's a paradox. There's a paradox at the beginning and there's a paradox at the end. And in order to make it past the precipice of that paradox, you have to have infinite or perfect faith. It has to be unwavering. You cannot make it through the eye of that needle without perfection. So, having gotten all that out of the way, there's a fractal nature to existence, to this, whatever you want to call it, simulation, whatever. And like I said, you get more real as you transcend, as you go up levels toward God, then you become more real because God is absolutely, well, God, if God wasn't absolutely real, then God would be the creator of absolute realness, right? And his soul is absolutely perfect and absolutely authentic and absolutely real in every sense, independent, consistent, and sustainably interactive. That's what I believe real is. And it's all three of those things to an absolute extent. Christ's soul is also absolutely independent, absolutely consistent, and absolutely sustainably interactive. But what's different about God and Christ is that as Christ transcends, because remember, he goes through these lives too, but he's on the other side. He's inside creation. So what happens to him is the exact inverse of what happens to God. So God starts off perfect and basking in his own perfection and just infinite, happy, glorifying, awesome. And there is no Christ yet. Then, after God starts the process of creation, God begins to suffer. And as the process of creation continues, God suffers more. As each of these worlds crystallizes, as soon as it crystallizes, then there's nothing beyond it because it's reached a totality. So when that nothing appears, at the exact simultaneous instant as the universe crystallizes, the instant that it crystallizes and becomes a totality, then necessarily, simultaneously, there is nothing that appears after it, okay? And the periphery confronts the center, and you get this really weird paradox that happens. If the faith remains perfect, I fucked that up a little bit. Hold on. As the universe crystallizes and it becomes a totality, then the instant that it becomes a totality, there is then therefore everything in it. And this is all contextual, and this is why fractalization is so important. So when you get to a point where in this world, in this place, at this time, there's a crystallization, then everything in that place, in that time, in that world crystallizes. Everything then becomes part of that universe. Then therefore necessarily there's nothing beyond that. But where does that nothing exist? Well, it must necessarily exist beyond that totality, right? So that's the unfolding. That's getting closer to God. As soon as it crystallizes, you get the nothing that's beyond it, which then broadens the horizon of the world or the place or the time in which that crystallization happened. That space and time and world broadens because it has already achieved absolutely everything fits within it. Then there must be absolutely nothing beyond it. so that it creates a beyond, and that's part of the co-creation, just like God. You get, as soon as you get that timeless epoch of perfection, as soon as that's achieved, the necessary result of it is that it creates nothing on the other side of it, beyond it, just like God did, happens to us too. So as that nothing gets created every single time that we crystallize down here, it creates more nothing around us. And that increase of nothing hurts God because it's darkness and God is the source of the light. And so God has infinite compounding suffering that increases over time. Christ, because Jesus is just the human incarnation of the Christ. Christ, being that he is inside of creation, experiences it in the exact opposite way, where throughout each of these crystallizations of these universes, every time a universe crystallizes, it hurts God and helps Christ. Because Christ was born in absolute hell. God was born in absolute heaven. God continuously suffers more, and Christ continuously suffers less. And so that's the trade-off. Do you want to hurt now or later? And God chose to hurt later rather than now. Isn't that funny? You would think it'd be the opposite, but nope. For God, it was no. I'm just gonna start off my life. I'm gonna get born in heaven, and I'm just gonna hang out in heaven for a timeless epoch and just chill. And fuck you guys. I'm just gonna kick it. I'm just taking care of yours truly. So, so that's what he does. And then, but at the end of that, then he's like, okay, well, here we go. Oh, we gotta fucking die now, because we already got a free ride, so time to pay the piper, because you don't get any free lunch, man. There's no free lunch. Every single thing, and this is why I believe in karma. Even God had karma, and apparently God's karma was really, 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 really good, and that's why he just had a really, 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 really good time before creation. And then he has to pay for that good karma because he got it for free. He didn't pay for it. He just had it. And like I said, that's another reason I believe it's random. I don't believe that God chose this. I believe that it was just random that way. Now, who chose that God had that nature? Well, nobody chose that. It's just that there has to have been a perfect soul. Why does there have to have been a perfect soul? Because whatever it was before creation must have existed. It's just like the inertial momenta that appears because of nothing's resistance to change. In the same way, if you can follow that line of logic where nothing never changes and can't change, and what is not changing? A resistance to change. And what is a resistance to change? Mass. And what is mass? It's equivalent to energy. So it's not energy because energy is change, but it's the equivalent of energy, which means that it's the exact opposite. And this is where karma comes from. If mass is equivalent to energy, if the resistance of change is equal to change, then you've got a balance, and that's karma. Now, as we kind of let go of our bodies, our masses, then we start to be more open and we start to be more accepting and more trusting of change. And so then we are becoming closer to God and we get closer to transcendence. And as we become totally open, like Jesus already showed us the way to do this, is you have that unwavering faith that everything happens for a reason, that it's all good. Even if it's bad, it's still good somehow. It will become good or it will be replaced by goodness. Oh, and that reminds me, when a person ceases, like I said, again, they only cease in that world. So when they step out, they step down. So if I, for example, just choose to say, you know what, God, I'm going to continue to judge you, and I don't believe that a perfect being should have to pay for anything. I believe that you should have just sat there, and the only real answer that there ever really could have been that ever really would have made any sense is for God to simply have remained God and for everything else to have remained non-existent. And I could continue with that. And if I chose to do that, then I would say that everything that happens here is pointless and everything that everyone does is meaningless and existence itself is a crime. To be is to err, etc., 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 in a bad way, like it shouldn't have even happened, kind of a thing, where there's no redeeming value for all the mistakes that we ever make. They just pile and pile and pile, and eventually we just get so saturated in filth that we become a disease unto ourselves. And I could just keep going and going and going. And if I do that, right, even if everybody else in this universe transcends and I'm the only last one, right? I'm the last one on the bus. I'm the last one going to the fucking happy camp. Then what will happen is I have two choices at the end of my hell, which all of everyone else would feel. All of you guys would feel my hell bleeding into you because we all share limits. And if you don't believe that we all share limits, try envisioning a world without them. Also, I forgot what I was going to say. And then, so when a person gets presented with that, so let's say I did that, okay, now my hell sucks and my soul's disintegrating and I'm writhing in agony and blah, 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 and darkness and void and resistance to change and I don't want anything to change. I'm not in control here, so everything sucks and blah, 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 blah. And you guys all feel a little tinge of that on your periphery. You see this darkness wavering in the distance, and it's scary and horrifying and creepy and gross and weird. And you're not really moved by it because you're already transcendent and you've got each other and you can see each other's lights shining like mad. But you see this dark ass fucking center and it won't go away. And it's just sitting there and sitting there and sitting there. It is, however, getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And eventually it pops out of existence. And what remains there is one of two things. Either I chose, you know what, fuck you, I'm Audi 3000, I'm done with this fucking bullshit. I'm gonna be a dork, I'm gonna be an idiot, I'm gonna be a fucking idiot. And I'm gonna just go down, okay? I'm not gonna accept that the changing world was right. No, fuck you, I'm right, and you're wrong for changing. You know, you should have just resisted all change and just been like a fucking rock of concrete brick that just sits there and does nothing and says nothing and thinks nothing and wants to be nothing and, you know, all of that. So if I choose to do that and I still choose not to change at the end of it, even despite the fact that all the darkness is gone and I still choose darkness, if I do that, I go down a level, which means I fold into myself because I've made myself as if I were God. I've sat on the throne of God and I've said, fuck you, God, fuck you, throne, fuck you, me, fuck everything. I think that everything is evil. I judge everything. Well, that's God's job, is to judge everything. Well, if I judge everything, then I have made myself God. And so then I fold into myself and I rip inside out and I become a world unto myself because I've chosen to resist change at all costs. And what does that do? It delays the inevitable because God is infinite, I'm not. That means at some point I'm gonna crack. Now I could either crack now or I could crack later, but I'm gonna crack. So let's say I do that after the first time. What does that mean? Well, it means that after having folded into myself and creating a new world out of nothing, then there's that world. It's an entire world. It's not just me anymore. Now there's independent agents running around in my system. And this is the fear that I have, is that everything in existence is somehow invading me and penetrating me and causing me pain. Well, it'll happen because we get presented with whatever we put in front of the mirror. And the reflection of that mirror changes depending on its orientation. If we move it to the right, the reflection changes to the left, etc. Right? Karma. So balance. And so when I fold into myself and I create a world out of nothing by resisting all change external to me, then I become that nothing. And what happens to the nothing? It bursts. It becomes a new big bang. It becomes another universe. And then everybody that's in that universe then transcends or not, And let's say they do transcend, and then I accept that. Well, then I transcend, and then I finish the fucking process, finally. And then I join everyone else in my world that already chose to transcend before I died, right? And then we all crystallize and become one crystalline world, and then we're all presented with the nothing that's beyond us, an even bigger nothing than I experienced when I folded into myself, and even bigger nothing awaits us when we do finally transcend. So why transcend? Because right after that, there's this barrier that opens. In between us and the nothing, there's this barrier of indiscernibility, a fog ensues. So while we may be crystalline, there is this fog of change that surrounds between us and nothing. And then that grows and unfolds, and it crystallizes. And then we get presented with yet another chance. Do we go up or down? Do we accept this change? Do we accept it with open arms, regardless of not being able to understand what the fuck just happened? Or do we resist that change and we say, no, I just want to stick inside myself and I don't want to deal with this shit anymore? And every time we say, I don't want to deal with this shit anymore, we fold into ourselves and we get a world that grows up inside of us. And our soul disintegrates, and it disintegrates into all these free agents. We shatter, and the shattering hurts. And then all those shattered pieces become independent individual agents, little tiny souls. And those souls grow, and eventually they transcend, and we can accept that. And we can then, come back. But we come back as an infinitude of other people. We don't come back as ourselves, and that's the cessation that I was talking about, just ceasing and walking out of the room. Well, you can do that, but you'll do it by shattering. And then it requires that all those shattered pieces reintegrate. And they reintegrate independently, because you couldn't do it yourself as a whole unit. You have to have pieces do it piecemeal, one piece at a time. And as they do it, you get more light. And as you get more light, it becomes more and more and more understandable to you. And you say, aha, okay, now I can see it. I can understand this. I can accept this. And as you begin to accept the change, then you transcend, and you'll eventually crystallize on the other side of that. But you'll crystallize as having to undergo all these different people living through quadrillions of years as the universe is born and dies. We're at a universal stage right now where it's 13.8 billion years old right now. I mean, if you were to think about that, and this is just a fraction of an instant in the eternal cosmos, think about how long it would take for an entire, from birth to the death of the universe. It would take a googolplex of years for us to have heat death finally cause everything to cease. And then it goes and it does it again, 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 because every single time that there is heat death and the universe dies, rather than transcending, it becomes that nothing. And that nothing does what? It becomes inertial, and that inertial momentum is then transferred into energy, which then explodes. And so we just keep going on these processes. And this is what the Hindus talk about when they talk about the reincarnation and the chains of karma, and why we have to transcend those chains, and eventually we achieve nirvana and we don't have any more incarnations and our karma is complete. Which is, again, not quite accurate, because there's no such thing as becoming God. Then there's no such thing as escaping all of these incarnations. There will always be another incarnation, whether up or down, whether larger or smaller, whether better or worse, there will always be another life. And we will just continue and continue and continue, and there is no such thing as being nothing. And even if we had been nothing, then we explode into a singularity and become another universe, another world unto ourselves. So we don't really stop existing, we just become something else. So everything is always changing. And the ultimate thing that I ever found was something I called samadhi, which is the idea that I don't have to change anything external to me. I just have to accept the changes that are always happening, that everything is already perfect. And so it's a constant state of present perfection, where it's like no matter what it changes into, it's perfect. Why? Because all these laws are all perfect. There's no better way to have put everything together than the way it has been put together. And even if we get it wrong, we're destined to get it right eventually. And we can't ever completely get obliterated. And even if we ever did get completely obliterated, we would just become another world. And then we would crystallize at the end of that. So there's no escaping perfection. There is no escape from it. It will happen, whether we want it to or not. We will learn and grow and evolve, and eventually we'll crystallize and transcend. And that's just the way that it is. It is built that way, and it's built perfectly. There's no better way to have built it than to make it so that no one ever dies and everyone is destined for immortality and perfection. And that's why I like to throw stuff at people. So we don't get distracted by signs and symbols, because that will happen. There will be these signs and symbols where it'll be like, but, and then your faith needs to stay unwavering. And you have to realize, again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if somebody throws a fucking binder in my fucking face. It'll shatter my samadhi at the time. I'll be like, oh, well, what the fuck? There's nobody that's going to be able to disregard a Volvo smashing into them at 80 miles an hour. You're going to feel it, but you'll know that at the end of that, you're going to be okay. You're going to go through a process. You're going to go through some changes. And no matter what those changes are, you're eventually going to be okay. You're going to be better off for it. And if you view it any other way, you're just going to end up eventually proving yourself wrong, because there's only so much you can destroy. You can't ever destroy everything. So even if I can't persist, and even if I lose my faith, that doesn't necessitate that everyone else does. And it doesn't erase the past in which everyone else did. So you've always got the Christ. He didn't waver. And there's nothing I can do now that would ever cause him to waver. So we've got one right there. And Christ is going to have his influence on people, and it's ostensibly been for the better. I don't see a world in which things got worse because of Christ's incarnation here. And so if that's true, then that must be the answer. That must be the way. And so it just keeps going like that. You'll get more and more and more of these vindications and verifications, and you'll learn more and more about it. And eventually you get closer and closer and closer to God. You eventually transcend the world that you're currently at, but you don't ever make it all the way to God. There will never be a day where you wake up as God. There will never be a day where you wake up as nothing. There will never be a day when you wake up as the demiurge. You'll never wake up as an absolute. You'll never achieve an absolute, because you're not absolute. Why? Again, random. It just so randomly happened to be the case that God's soul was the absolute, perfect of all perfection. And it just so happens to randomly be the case that mine isn't. And why is that? Randomness. And why is it random? Because everybody got an equal chance. Everybody got an equal chance. Everybody, the entire map of all space and time and nature was strewn out to its utmost limit and spread out all throughout, pervading all throughout all possibilities, because there's no external being beyond God that would make it any other way. And so then all of the internal parts, of which there must be an infinitude, must have all been assembled according to each other rather than through some external being, because that's the totality of all totalities. And that totality is God. And that God has that perfect nature, because there has to be a perfection, because there is an equal chance for everything to be the case, because there's no God beyond God making it any other way. And that's the inherent balance in the system. Just like every system has an inherent balance, it inherently, innately attempts to balance. It resists change because it has mass. It changes because it has energy. And those things balance so that it persists. You don't ever see a rock spontaneously burst apart into a million pieces. It sits there. Unless somebody breaks it, it's going to sit there. And that's how everything in existence is. And that's why I believe that it's random, where, at least as far as our natures are concerned. And it's good to view it that way, because I don't know if I'm going to go up or down after this life. But if I view it as it's a random chance, and that just like all random systems, it evolves. Over time, it will start assimilating the good and it will disintegrate the evil. And just like any randomly evolving species or system, it will eventually get better and better and better at persisting, at staying alive longer. And so that's what awaits me no matter what I do. And as long as I have that view, then I can be secure in that. So it isn't quite that I get placed in places, but it also isn't quite the case that I have total control. It's kind of in between them. It's like you have control over whatever it is that you do right now. But eventually you're gonna end up with being closer to God, because it hurts to go down and it feels good to go up. It will destroy yourself to destroy others, but it will create yourself to create with others or to create others. And so as you progress, the good assimilates and integrates with the good, and the evil disintegrates and repulses other evil and goodness and becomes isolated and left behind. And then it becomes as if it were nothing, being nothing, and then it develops inertial momentum, and then that inertial momentum shatters and it bursts and becomes a new world. And so it's inevitable. Eventually everyone will go up. So, except for the devil. So we already talked about Christ. So then, like I had said, Christ is like the mirror image of God. There's God, right, who has an absolutely perfect, unwavering soul. But then there's also Christ, who has an absolutely unperfectly wavering soul. And then there's the devil, which also has an unchanging soul. But like Christ's soul is best understood as being all energy, change, because Christ incarnates differently each time. We've got a human one over here, there's an alien one over there, in some other universe he's a fucking tree, in some universe he's a bird, in some universe he's a cat, or whatever it is, and teaches all the other little kitties to play nice with each other. They all transcend. In each of these universes, Christ incarnates as whatever it is that the soul that is centered, the center of that world is. In other words, I'm totally full of shit. So, there's a different incarnation of Christ in every universe. In this universe, Christ incarnated as a human, but in other universes, he incarnates as an alien or a robot or something like that. The point being that Christ is always changing. There's always a change in his incarnations. However, his soul, where he's pointing, does not change. He changes, but his soul doesn't change. And so what is all this changingness? Well, Jesus, now you say like, well, he was born sinless. Sure, he was. But there is a change. He grows up, does he not? Does he not grow? Does he die on the cross the day he was born? No, he goes through his life. He first starts out as a baby, and then he becomes a toddler, and then he becomes a small child, and then he becomes an adolescent and a young man, and then he dies when he's 33. And then, after we crystallize, then Christ's soul will be released, and it'll go and go into some other world and incarnate as some other creature. And in that world, he'll again live, and he'll change through his life. So when Christ changes throughout his life, his faith doesn't change, but the rest of him does. And so the way that we'll always be able to tell if it's Christ or not is that, yes, he is born sinless because he has a perfect soul. He will never sin. But what he will do is he'll change like the rest of us change. He'll learn like the rest of us learn, but his faith will always be unwavering. No matter what you throw at this kid, he is just gonna keep going. He's just gonna keep doing his thing. You cannot stop him. You could kill him, but you can't stop him. And his spirit's gonna live on anyway. So there's really no point in trying to kill Christ. But if you did, it wouldn't change anything. He would just keep going. His faith is not going to waver. It cannot waver. It's perfect. So in that way, Christ and God are the same in that their faith is unwavering in the goodness of creation, despite everything that happens to them. And the devil is similar in the sense that his, what would you call that? Lack of faith, absence of faith, distrust, judgment of everything is always the same. He always says that everything sucks and everybody sucks and there is nothing that does not suck. And even God, who is perfect, and I believe the devil recognizes God's perfection and then judges him and everyone else for it. Because he says, well, first of all, why does God get to be God? Why didn't I get to be born as God? And secondly, why is God the only one that ever gets to achieve perfection? No matter how many times that we go through these incarnations, we never actually achieve real absolute perfection. We never become God. No one can ever become God. And so all this suffering is inevitably pointless from an absolutist perspective because it never ends with us becoming God. We always have to go further. We always have to try harder. We always have to go through more shit and more suffering. And it will never end, and our suffering will always be there. And that's the Luciferian view, or the satanic view anyway. And that's what makes the devil. And that soul is, the exact opposite of Christ, in that he also has an unwavering dedication toward a particular source, but unlike Christ, the devil's source is nothing, and the devil worships nothing and believes in nothing and wants everything to go back to nothing, the way it was before creation, because before creation everything is perfect. And if you look at that, it's actually a valid argument. Now, you may not like it, it might be distasteful and repulsive and disgusting to you, but it makes sense. And you can understand why someone would believe that, because it's true. We have this perfect being that suffers an infinite amount of suffering because he decided to create us. Now try not hating yourself. And then you can hate God too, because how dare he make himself suffer? Now I have to feel guilty for existing. And it will never change, because I'll never become God. I'll never become perfect. I'll never even be Christ. I don't even get that. And so, yeah, the devil has a point. And so that's how the devil goes through his, existence, through creation. Is the devil is the hole that God fills when he creates nothing and folds into God's self. In order to fold into God's self, the very first thing that God ever created was the devil. And the reason that God created the devil was so that God could fold inward into the devil. And so, yeah, the devil has a lot to bitch about. Why the fuck did he choose me? And then not only that, but he can never, ever change, because he is who he is. The nature of Satan's soul is perfect mass. It never changes. It never can change. And he had no choice. So that's what I was saying, is you don't really want to ask these questions, because as you ask these questions, you start to learn these things and you start to understand why the devil hates God and everything else and himself so much. So when someone like me, a finite creature, has that view, that satanic view, then we fold inwards and we create a world unto ourselves. What world is there in which there is nothing? That's a paradox. So then when Satan folds into Satan, there is no change, because there is nothing there to fold and there is nothing there to fold into. And so it never changes. And so the devil doesn't suffer, at least not directly. But he suffers indirectly. And no one can ever be Satan except Satan. And you would not know that you were Satan Because you would be Satan. You would be nothing. Being nothing. Father of all lies, paradox of all paradoxes, darkness of all darkness, whole of God, God's asshole, from which all shit emerges. So God fucked his own ass until he got himself pregnant. And then he rapes all of his children so that they become pregnant. And that's the satanic view. I mean, like I said, it's valid. It's logically valid to look at the world like that. And I give it to you because of those of you who already have that view. Charles, who hates these things. You're not Satan. You can change. You may not want to, but you will eventually. Even if you don't change in this life, you'll change after it. Even if you don't change right after it, you'll change eventually. After enough of these fractalizations, after enough of these worlds appear inside your soul, eventually all those independent pieces will overtake you. And there will not be even nothing left of you. And you will change. And then you will transcend. So there really is no point in following Satan, because you will never be able to follow Satan all the way down to Satan's level. And Satan, while surrounded by light, hates it. So to make a hell of heaven, you don't get a heaven of hell. You just get a paradox.